So, well, predominantly I've worked on issues that sit at the intersection of gender and sexuality, largely because I think that that is a very useful framework that allows us to understand the ways in which nations, people, groups of nations, and states work, and how women's bodies are an essential part of that conversation. I think in everyday society we sort of assume that people give birth, people relate to each other in ways that are normalized and naturalized, and so they're not an essential part of labor. They're not an essential part of the ways in which women's bodies get used and misused. So for me, that's a very important lens because it highlights the things that we take as normal and okay, and it points, in my view, very powerfully to the ways in which patriarchy operates in our society and why it continues to survive and thrive. Yeah. What about you?
Bueno, yo creo que hay varios aspectos que son importantes. Creo que el género, además de permitirle a uno entender la situación en la cual vivimos actualmente, también es un lenguaje que nos empodera como mujeres en estos pues contextos difíciles en los que vivimos. Y me parece además que cruzar eso o verlo interconectado con la ciencia, con la política, con la economía, con aquellos que son lenguajes mayores para nosotros, también enriquece eso y se ve enriquecido por esa perspectiva. Población es una categoría que se usa en muchos contextos de una forma despolitizante, que se usa sin considerar todas sus complejidades, sin pensarla en los contextos. Así que yo creo que si empezamos por hablar sobre eso desde una perspectiva de género, empezamos a ponerle todos esos contenidos que necesita tener para que entendamos realmente qué significa eso.
If we rethought population, it would place questions of power at the center of the conversation. It would place women squarely at the center of that conversation, patriarchy, and also, global political dynamics that influence the ways in which some of these discourses travel around the world and how they get taken up in policy positions and, copy and pasted in contexts in which national dialogues are happening in very different ways. National movements of people that are challenging these ideas are also happening in different ways. And when we copy and paste, some of these global political discourses in this way, it stifles, this sort of organic ways of thinking that are happening in different contexts. Pretty simply for me, it would be by continuing to do the work that we do, continuing to critique, challenge, write radically about, feminist ideas and theories that have existed, and that continue to be produced. I think we must not fall into the trap of trying to simplify the message, simplify messages that we know are very complex, ideas that are very complex, because oppression and power do not work in simple ways. They work in very complex ways in our societies, in different structures. And we must be careful of not taking on language that is deployed by powerful institutions, that is deployed by states and governments that are simply interested in keeping the majority in a particular situation because we want to be accessible. I think we need to speak in a language that can communicate our ideas, but let's not confuse access for simplicity of message. Let's not try to argue that the issues that we're dealing with are simple. They're not that simple, in my view.
Y yo creo que una segunda cosa es tener en cuenta la experiencia de la gente. O sea, toda esta cuestión de ese interés por el ambiente y las mujeres, y esa relación entre el ambiente y las mujeres también es una relación de experiencia. Y en ese sentido parte del trabajo que hacemos como feministas es mostrar esa experiencia, mostrar todas esas, ¿cómo decir eso? Todas esas resistencias cotidianas de las mujeres frente a estas cuestiones pues relacionadas Yo pienso que parte de esas solidaridades van como en reencontrarnos como mujeres, pero sabiendo que somos mujeres muy distintas, ¿no? Tenemos experiencias distintas, tenemos formas de hacer y de entender la política que son distintas. Y la solidaridad está en reconocer finalmente lo que tú decías hace un rato frente a esos sistemas de opresión, y es que son grandes, se mantienen si nosotros jugamos también ese mismo juego. Pero yo creo también que esas solidaridades no deberían ser cosas predecibles, sino, no sé cómo decirlo, que podemos trabajar juntas también, muy vinculadas con los contextos, muy para pensar las cosas a largo plazo.
So one of the things that I've always admired about Latin American feminist organizing is just the ways in which Latin American feminists really center theory and analysis in the way they build movements. And I think that in terms of imagining ways of building solidarity, that is definitely something that African women who are organizing on a day-to-day basis and challenging states and challenging different political and economic issues can definitely, learn from, that there's a whole history of knowledge, there's a whole history of organizing and different practices, even though contexts differ. But there's so much that you can learn from the ways other people are challenging the very same things, even though they're manifesting differently. But they're challenging the very same structures of oppression. So that learning, is something that I think is absolutely important. Building solidarity today does not actually require physical presence. Yes. Technology has made the ability to cross those divides very easy. And for us as feminists, it's about consistently creating those links. In last year, there was this whole debate in South Africa about fees must fall, which is about challenging education systems, decolonizing education. There are very many linkages that could easily be made between the fees must fall movement in South Africa, which resonated with different African countries, to the Black Lives Matter, work that is happening in America. And I'm sure one can find other similarities. Our sisters who are sitting in the global north, where major ideas about politics and economy, that frame countries in the global south's futures, must challenge those systems. And building solidarity is about also lifting up the voices, the writing, and the analysis by sisters from the global south, And so the idea of co-creating knowledge for me is a very important one. And I think this meeting has provided an opportunity for us to get to know each other's work. And we must continue to work actively, whether you're sitting in academic institutions, to cite each other, because that is how knowledge travels, If we simply say, oh, it was great to meet you, Claudia, and go on, and I know you've written good work, no one is going to know about your work if I don't take it with me to the African context, if I don't take it with me to other places where people are interested in learning about what you're writing about.
No, me parece que lo que dijiste ahorita con respecto a cómo creamos lazos, justamente porque la tecnología lo permite, eso me parece fundamental. Yo estoy de acuerdo en que de aquí lo que tiene o lo que debe salir no es solamente la cuestión de que nos vimos, nos conocimos nosotras, sino el hecho de que podemos seguir construyendo cosas juntas, justamente porque existen estas cosas, porque es el tiempo en el que vivimos. Entonces también como situarnos justamente no solo en la cuestión del contexto, sino en las posibilidades que tenemos también para establecer diálogos, me parece muy clave. Y yo creo que todas tenemos cosas para aprender las unas de las otras. O sea, todas tenemos críticas para hacer al feminismo pues del norte, tanto como las tenemos para el feminismo del sur, para esa idea del sur global que a veces es tan problemática, por lo menos desde el punto de vista desde el cual lo vemos en Latinoamérica, y para traer a nuestros propios imaginarios esos otros espacios con los que se supone compartimos todo un campo, compartimos un lugar en esa semántica global, pero con los que tenemos tantas diferencias y sobre los que tenemos tanto desconocimiento también.